Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening, and remember, the Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a textbook, world history textbook, cover to cover. Today, we are on Chapter 15, Section 4. Chapter 15, Section 4 is Encounters in East Asia, and this is a section about the first global age, which is a mixture of Asian and European interconnectedness. So, exploration, spice trade, the founding of the New World, simple stuff like that. Let me set some context for you now by reading a quick review of yesterday's reading, which was on Chapter 15, Section 3, European Outposts in Southeast Asia and India. The section discusses the rise of Portuguese Empire in the East following Vasco da Gama's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, which is southernmost point of Africa, and the seizure of Goa in 1510, which became their major military and commercial base. Their major commercial base, meaning Portuguese. Albuquerque, maybe that's Albuquerque and I'm just reading it like an idiot. That's entirely possible. Led the Portuguese in ending Muslim power and establishing a trading empire with military and merchant outposts in southern seas. Despite their sea power, the Portuguese were on the fringe of Asian trade and forced resentment due to their intolerance of other religions in Asia. The Dutch eventually challenged Portuguese domination and established the Dutch East India Company in 1602 and enforced a monopoly on the Spice Islands, controlling shipments to Europe and much of the trade in Southeast Asia. In the 16th century, Spain colonized the Philippines, which became a key trading link in its overseas empire. Spanish priests also sought to convert Filipinos to Christianity, and later tried to spread Catholic teachings in China and Japan. Meanwhile, before the 1700s, European traders made very little impact on India, which was enjoying a period of strength and prosperity under the Mughal dynasty. India was a world leader in textile manufacturing, exporting silk and cotton cloth, and was not threatened by European trading concessions. However, Mughal power declined due to religious conflict, civil war, corruption, and peasant rebellions, allowing for British and French to establish a foothold in India through alliances with local officials and independent rulers. Thank you for listening to that quick review. Now let's read the next section. Section 4, Chapter 15. Encounters in East Asia. Setting the scene, the Europeans who reached Asia in the 1500s often made a poor impression on their hosts. The Italian traveler Niccolo Mannucci told how Asians thought the Europeans that they were... Mannucci told how Asians thought that Europeans have no polite manners, that they are ignorant, wanting in ordered life, and very dirty. I don't know what that accent was. Europeans, by contrast, wrote enthusiastically about China. In 1590, a visitor described Chinese artisans, clever, making devices out of gold, silver, and other metals. He was also impressed with their abilities in handicrafts and gunsmithing, and wrote, "They daily publish huge multitudes of books." Portuguese ships first reached China by way of the South China Sea during the Ming dynasty. To the Chinese, the Portuguese were southern barbarians. Like other foreigners, they lacked civilized ways of the Middle Kingdom. European trade with China. Heading. The Ming Dynasty, you will recall, ended its overseas exploration in the mid-1400s. Confucian officials had little use for foreigners. "Since our empire owns the world," said the Ming document, "there is no country on this or other sides of the seas which does not submit to us." Strict limits on trade. Portuguese traders reached China by sea in 1514. To the Chinese, the newcomers had little to offer in exchange for silk and porcelains. European textiles and metalwork were inferior to Chinese products. The Chinese therefore demanded payments in gold or silver. The Ming eventually allowed the Portuguese a trading post at Macao, near Canton, present-day Guangzhou. Later, they let Dutch, English, and other Europeans trade with Chinese merchants, but only under strict limits. Foreigners could trade only at Canton under supervision of imperial officials. When each year's trading season ended, they had to sail away. Scholars and missionaries. A few European scholars, like the brilliant Jesuit priest Matteo Ricci, did make a positive impression on Ming China. In late 1580s, Ricci learned to speak Chinese and adopted Chinese dress. Ricci and other priests had little success spreading their religious beliefs, although Chinese rulers welcomed the chance to learn the arts and sciences of Renaissance Europe. Heading. The Manchu Conquest. By the early 1600s, the aging Ming dynasty was decaying. Revolts erupted, and Manchu invaders from the north pushed through the Great Wall. The Manchus ruled a region in the northeast that had long been influenced by Chinese civilization. In 1644, victorious Manchu armies seized Beijing and made it their capital. Qing rule, Qing, King, Qing rule, Qing rule. The Manchus set up a new dynasty called the Qing. They spelled it phonetically for me. They don't spell it phonetically in the subheading, though. They only spell it in the body of the paragraph. So, now I know. The Qing dynasty, meaning pure. To preserve their distinct identity, the Manchus barred intermarriage between Manchus and Chinese. Manchu women were forbidden to follow the traditional Chinese practices of foot binding. That's good. Still, the Manchus won the support of the Chinese scholar officials because they adopted Confucian system of government. For each top government position, the Qing chose two people, one Manchu and one Chinese. Local government remained in the hands of the Chinese, but Manchu troops stationed across the empire ensured loyalty. Two rulers oversaw the most brilliant age of Qing. Kangxi, who ruled from 1661 to 1722, was an able administrator and military leader. He extended Chinese power into Central Asia and promoted Chinese culture. Kangxi's grandson, Qianlong, had an equally successful reign from 1736 to 1796. He expanded China's borders to rule the largest area in the nation's history. Qianlong retired after 60 years because he did not want to rule longer than his grandfather had. Prosperity. The Chinese economy expanded under both emperors. New chops from the Americans, I don't know what that means, new crops from the Americans, such as potatoes and corn, boosted farm output, which in turn contributed to a population boom. Chinese population rose from 140 million to Chinese population rose from 140 million in 1740 to over 300 million by 1800. Peace and prosperity encouraged further growth in handicraft industries, including silk, cotton, and porcelain. Internal trade grew, as did the demand for Chinese goods from all over the world. Response to Westerners. The Qing maintained the Ming policy of restricting foreign trade. Still, Europeans kept pressing to expand trade to cities other than Guangzhou. In 1793, Lord Macartney arrived in China at the head of British diplomatic mission. He brought samples of British-made goods to show the Chinese the advantages of trade with Westerners. The Chinese thought the goods were gifts offered as tribute to the emperor and looked on them as rather crude products. Further, misunderstandings followed. Macartney insisted on an audience with the emperor. The Chinese told Macartney he would have to perform the traditional kowtow, touching his head to the ground to show respect to the emperor. Macartney refused. He also offended the Chinese by speaking of natural superiority of the English. The negotiations faltered. In the end, Qianlong did receive Macartney, but in meeting accomplished nothing. Later, in a letter to King George III of Britain, Qianlong rejected the request for trading rights. At the time, Qianlong's attitude seemed justified by Chinese success. After all, he already ruled the world's greatest empire. Why should he negotiate with the nations as distant as Britain? In the long run, however, his policy proved disastrous. Even then, there was much the Chinese could have learned from the West. In the 1800s, China would learn about Western advances, especially in military technology, the hard way. New heading: Korea and isolation. Like China, Korea restricted outside contacts in the 1500s and 1600s. Earlier Korean traders had far-ranging contacts across East Asia. A Korean map from the 1300s accurately outlines lands from Japan to the Mediterranean. Koreans probably acquired this knowledge from Arab traders who had visited Korea. The Joseon dynasty, you will recall, firmly embraced Confucian ideas. Like the Chinese, Koreans felt the Confucian learning was the most advanced in the world. The low status of merchants in Confucianism also led Koreans to look down on foreign traders. Two other events led to Koreans to turn inward. A Japanese invasion in the 1590s devastated the lands of Korea. Then, in 1636, the Manchus conquered Korea before overrunning Ming China. When the Manchus set up the Qing dynasty in China, Korea became a tributary state, run by its own government, but forced to acknowledge China's supremacy. The two invasions left Korea feeling like a shrimp among whales. In response, the Koreans chose isolation, excluding all foreigners except the Chinese and a few Japanese. When European sailors were shipwrecked on Korean shores, they were imprisoned or killed. As a result, Korea became known to the West as the Hermit Kingdom. I think we can say that currently about modern-day North Korea, right? Hermit Kingdom. Interesting. Even though Korea had few contacts with the world for about 250 years, this period was a great age for Korean arts and literature. In one satirical tale, author Pak Chi-wan describes a poor scholar who breaks with tradition to become a merchant. Here, Master Ho describes doing business in an isolated country. Our country has no trade with other countries, and everything we use is produced and consumed in the same province. With 10,000 yang, you can buy just about all of one particular item produced in the country. You can buy a whole lot, whether you load it on a cart or on a boat. Pak Chi-wan, the story of Ho. Japan and foreign traders. New heading. Unlike the Chinese or Koreans, the Japanese at first welcomed Western traders. In 1543, the Portuguese reached Japan. Later came the Spanish, Dutch, and English. They arrived at the turbulent time when strong daimyo were struggling for power. The Japanese quickly acquired Western firearms and built castles modeled on European designs. In fact, the new weapons may have helped the Tokugawa shoguns centralize power and impose order. Japan was much more open to European missionaries than China. Jesuits, like the Spanish priests Francis Xavier, found the Japanese curious and eager to learn about Christianity. A growing number of Japanese adopted the new faith. The Tokugawa shoguns, however, grew increasingly hostile towards foreigners. After learning how Spain had seized the Philippines, they may have seen the newcomers as agents of an invading force. In addition, Japanese officials disliked the intrigues and competition amongst Christian missionaries. They also suspected the Japanese Christians, who have had number as many as 300,000, owed their allegiance to the Pope rather than the Japanese leaders. In response, the Tokugawas expelled foreign missionaries. They brutally persecuted Japanese Christians, killing many thousands of people. By 1638, the Tokugawas had barred all Western merchants and forbidden Japanese to travel abroad. To further their isolation, they outlawed the building of large ships, thereby ending foreign trade. In order to keep informed about world events, they permitted just 1 or 2 Dutch ships each year to trade at a small island in Nagasaki Harbor. Through this tiny gateway, a few Japanese did learn about some foreign ideas. They studied Dutch medical texts, for example, which they found to be more accurate than Chinese ones. Looking ahead, and then we will end our beautiful reading for today. Thank you for joining me, and please subscribe if you're continually watching. I really do appreciate it if you've made it this far. Please subscribe. Please leave a quarter emoji in the comment section if you would like to support in that way as well, hence the algorithm. Japan maintained its policy of strict isolation for more than 200 years. Isolation had a profound effect on Japan. Without outside influence, Japanese culture turned inward. Still, art and literature spread beyond upper classes. Artists found new ways to interpret traditions. During this time, internal trade boomed. Cities grew in size and importance, and some merchant families gained wealth and status. By the early 1700s, Edo, present-day Tokyo, had 1 million inhabitants, more than either London or Paris. In 1853, Japan was forced to reopen contacts with the Western world. Renewed relations unleashed an extraordinary period of change that helped Japan emerge as a major world power. I didn't realize that they were isolated so recently. That's pretty recently. That's like around the Civil War, they were like just stopping being isolated. Not that long ago. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. God bless. Bye-bye. Hello. Goodbye.